Creative Nonfiction Podcast is sponsored by Casualty of Words, a writing podcast for people in a hurry. Each episode is under 3 minutes long and gives you a shot in the creative arm. You've got a feed full of long pods, like this one. Let Casualty of Words be done in the time that it takes you to brush your teeth. About 5 days a week, from my mouth to your brain. You dig it? Oh, let's hit it, baby. Well, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. Carolyn Holbrook is here. She is the author of Tell Me Your Names and I Will Testify essays. It's by the University of Minnesota Press. She's the founder of Sassy. It's spelled S-A-S-E, like self-addressed stamped envelope. Who remembers those, baby? The Right Place, she founded that, and she now leads More Than a Single Story. She teaches at Hamline College, which I called Hamline in the interview because I'm a moron and should go out to the woodshed for the night. Sleep by the compost tumbler that's getting all kinds of funky. But we'll get to that conversation soon enough. I got to make sure you're subscribed to this little podcast. I mean, listen, I get it. I know. You only have so much time in a day or a week. Adding another podcast to your life is a challenge. I get it. But if you're into true stories, you're in the right spot, man. I try to make this hour or so that you spend with this show as worthwhile as possible. So you look back on that hour and say, damn, I got to go get some work done. Screw these dishes. What's that, honey? I said, screw these dishes. If you're feeling kind, consider leaving a nice written review on Apple Podcasts to help with the show's packaging, if you will. And if you're really enrolled and you want to support the show with your wallet, with a few dollars and cents, head over to patreon.com/CNFpod. For 75 cents an episode, if I do my math right, that's like 3/4. You get transcripts. You get exclusive access to the audio magazines going forward. Issue 1 is always free. And you put money in the war chest to help with the production of the show and hopefully pay writers for their accepted work. I can't say I can pay writers quite yet. I might go into my allowance and pay writers for this next round. Maybe upwards of $50 per accepted essay. I think that's fair. You know, for a fairly prominent literary magazine where I wrote a 4,000-word essay, I got paid $50 for that. So I think given $50 for upwards of a 2,000-word audio essay, I think that might be fair, right? Maybe? Think of it this way. If you sign up for that tier 1, it ends up being $48 a year. That, in theory, can pay one writer for her essay. You're supporting the community, and that's what this show has really always been about. Now, I feel like I've wasted more than enough of your time. If you want to hang out at the end of the show for my parting shot, by all means, it's there. It's there for you if you want to hang out a little longer. Have a nightcap, if you will. It's there. We can do it. Follow the show, CNF Pod, across the big 3. Subscribe to the monthly newsletter at brendanamara.com, hey, and just strap in for this lovely chat with the one and the only Carolyn Holbrook. Huh. In what way would you say, writing and teaching has been just indispensable for you over the past year?
Indispensable, that's a good word for it because it has been. I think that if I didn't have the writing and the teaching, I'd probably be a little crazier right now, or just, feeling, just not knowing what to do with myself, and I hear people saying that all the time, people who are not in the arts and don't have that outlet, don't have a way to process what's going on. So, I do a lot of encouraging people to journal and to to just write it out, sing it out, dance it out, whatever you need to do
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The journaling as a practice is so key, and I've been lucky in that I've had a journaling practice for many years,
Mm-hmm.
and usually in the morning. And I've actually
Mm-hmm.
taken to doing like I do a page in the morning, and I actually have started doing a page at night as a way to kind of just I don't know a way to land the plane in a way
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't involve screens or anything. So I wonder for you, like what process by which do you sort of employ journaling?
Well, it depends. Sometimes I just write crap down, just daily crap. And
Yeah,
then other times, are you familiar with Dr. James Pennebaker?
I
And
am
his,
not.
yeah, he's at University of Texas. He has this process which he discovered because he was going through some stuff that if you write down what's troubling you for 4 days, that it tends to do some sort of magical healing because in the first day you're just, you're just vomiting it out. And then in the second day you start to, try to see things a little bit more clearly. And by the fourth day, it's like, oh, yeah, I guess I can handle this. So, if I'm going through some really heavy duty stuff, I will employ that practice. Um, and it's really good. And then other times, I sometimes I just make lists. So it just, I don't have a consistent way of journaling. My only consistency is that I do journal every morning. It's my first thing in the morning with my coffee. But I think I'm going to try what you said too. I think I'm going to try. I love the idea of also journaling at night to, as you put it, to land the plane. I love that. So
Hmm.
I think I'm going to, we all know people who journal either in the morning or, they have a specific time, some at night to process the day. But I've never thought of doing it in the morning and at night.
Yeah, I gotta ask you, Carolyn. So you've got the nickname Slam Granny. Where does that come
Where
from?
does that come from? Well, um, in addition to writing and teaching, I tend to start small arts organizations, and I started one in 1993, and it was so crazy. Are you familiar with the Loft
I
Literary
am
Center
just
here in Minneapolis?
I am in because I had Annika Fajardo on the show a
Yeah,
couple years ago, and she's a
yeah,
good friend of
yeah,
the show and a great
mhm.
writer,
Yeah.
and so that's how I came to know it.
Yeah. Well, I was their first person of color to to be a program director. It drove me crazy. But anyway, that's another story. But I worked there. I worked there for 5 years as program director, and I decided because it was so traumatic that I was never going to do this stuff again, ever again. And so the day after I left, all of my energy came back, and I hope you're okay with me rambling because it's sort
Oh
of
yes.
it's getting to the slam granny. The day after I left, all my energy came back, and people had been asking me when they found out that I was leaving. Am I going to start another organization? Because I had had a smaller one before I came to the loft, and I kept telling them, no, I am so done with this stuff. But when I got my energy back, I decided, you know what? Maybe I do want to try this again. So I called a bunch of people together, people from different ages, different communities, different ethnic groups, different genres, and all that. And a friend of mine who does ideation sessions invited us to come down to his place, and he would lead a session to look at what another organization besides the loft would look like. And we came up with this group with the name called SASE, the right place. And because what the SASE is, and if you get it back, it means you lost. So we so we did a play on that word and called it sassy, so that which meant that everybody wins. And I think it was around a couple of years later, some people who had been doing poetry slams wanted to bring the National Poetry Slam to Minneapolis, and they asked me if Sassy would be willing to host it, and I said, yeah, of course we will. So we ended up going to Chicago like 3 years in a row to try to convince them that Minneapolis was a good place to do the National Poetry Slam. And somewhere in those 3 years, somebody called me Slam Granny, and it stuck. I haven't been to a slam since I don't know when, but I'm still Slam Granny.
So, in what way did writing sort of choose you, Carolyn, in a sense? And it's something that you probably was baked into your bones in a lot of ways.
Hmm. Yeah, I come from a family that's, they're kind of loud. And I was the quiet one and the middle child and, sort of the invisible one. I felt invisible anyway, but writing always appealed to me because I could write stuff. I could, write, childish poems and all that. And, they would listen. They, meaning the poems and the paper and the pen or pencil or whatever I used, would listen to me. And I felt like writing was a real, entity, a real friend, you know? And so I guess it did choose me. Yeah, because it was the way that I could communicate and feel like I was being heard. Yeah.
Well, yeah, for someone who felt invisible, this was a medium that was not going to judge you in
Mm-hmm.
any way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love early in your book too, where you write most writers are familiar with the muse who helps us with our writing and the internal critic who tries to put roadblocks in our path. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, the muse and the critic are the voices of my maternal aunts, both
Yes.
both who have been in the ancestral realm for many years. And I
Mm-hmm.
highlighted that. I love that passage that's where the juice is coming from for you.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah. And yeah, they're still, I feel like they're still around me, one of them encouraging me and the other one, telling me to stop, shut up, don't talk, don't tell that stuff. Yep.
And so that in and of itself, that could be a voice that would be, stifling to you as a creative person or as a writer. But ultimately, you are putting these things down. So, where do you find I don't know, for lack of a better term, maybe like the courage to just surrender to that and, get these stories down?
I think part of it is from the aunt that encourages me because she was always, she's been dead for a very long time, but there was just something about her. She had this way about her that was, she was a gutsy woman. She lived in San Francisco. She lived here when we were little, but then she moved to San Francisco. And when we would go visit her, she always had a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigarette in the other, was dressed in, really gorgeous, you know, clothing, and was just, ready for the world. And the world was ready for her. And I would, as the quiet one in the family, I would observe her and she just fascinated me. And I felt like, I can do anything just from observing my gutsy aunt. I think a lot of it comes from that and thinking about, things that she did with her life that just, makes me feel like, yeah, I can do this stuff,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and as you were growing up, of course, like you've been dealt a lot of adversity. You
Hmm.
had your first child when you were 17, and
Hmm.
I believe it was Stevie, and he
Yep.
was put until you turned 18 was I don't know, a ward of the state, I imagine,
Hmm.
and then you had to essentially prove that you could then take him on, and you're doing this at such a young age. So
Yep.
how did you not let that early adversity get you down, and you kept your eyes upward, as it were?
I did let it get me down, but there was also something else, in addition to my aunt. You probably read about my eighth grade English teacher. When I was a teenager, I was just not a model teenager at all. I was the worst nightmare of a teenager. Um, but my eighth grade English teacher saw beyond the stuff that I presented, and she saw something else there, and she welcomed me and she encouraged me. And, you know, I think it's really true that, with kids, sometimes it only takes one person to accept them. And, she always stayed in the back of my mind. And I don't know what my aunt thought of me. I honestly don't, other than to give me the courage to do what I wanted to do. But I don't recall ever having a real conversation with her. She was just someone I observed. But my English teacher, I interacted with her. And she always, she looked at me and she saw me. And, no matter what adversity I went through that you read in my book for the next 20, 30 years, her voice was always there somewhere in the back of my mind that, I am a worthy person. I can do what I came here to do. It's just amazing to me that, the influence, her influence stayed with me in such a powerfully positive way for so many years while I was undergoing, you know, other things that were just not very positive or pleasant. I hope I'm making sense here.
Oh yeah, of course. And like, what do you think she saw in you, given that you put off a probably a vibe that probably sensed like you didn't want to, maybe put in the effort or learn, and yet she still saw something in you. So what do you think it was that she saw that allowed her to be like, I can tell there's something in Carolyn, and I'm going to keep trying to see her and let her be seen.
In a weird way, I think it was more about her than it was about me. Her ability to see and to care. I would say mostly her ability to see because what did she see in me? She must have seen, someone who had or was a lot more, that there was more behind my exterior than most people saw. So, I really do think that she just had the ability to see or to, and the empathy, the compassion, and all that kind of stuff, to look beyond the surface of, what some surly little kid, presented in the classroom. And, I remember I wrote a poem in her class that maybe that's what it was. It was just a poem that an eighth grade kid would write. It was, an awful poem. But, I think there was something so inviting about her that I was willing to just show it to her. And, there was as much bravado as I tried to show. I was really a shy kid. So I remember sort of, sidling up to her desk after all the kids had left the classroom so I could show it to her. There must have been something that she was presenting, that made me feel that I could trust her. I would come from the principal's office to her classroom, from my class before hers, because I was always in the principal's office, but she always welcomed me no matter what. And it's something that I just carried with me when I started teaching in community college and I saw so many kids that, that come into the classroom the way that I did.
Well, that's right. Yes, a lot of the students that you worked with there were trying to finish their high school degree or diploma, and
Mhm.
had a similar kind of bravado that I think you probably recognized in yourself when you
Yep.
were that age, and yet like occasionally you you had given your experience and given your experience with your English teacher, you were able to be like, okay, I see the sort of vibe that's being put off, but I know there's something else beneath the surface here.
You just made me wonder, what if she came from a background similar to mine? Maybe that's why she could see me. I'll never know.
Right? Yeah, it very well could be, and that's just
Hmm.
a way of the dots connecting themselves in
Yeah.
that very special way.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, with this book, it's on the cover, of course, it says essays, but it's very much it's kind of like linked essays, very memoiristic. It
Yep.
feels like they belong together, but
Hmm.
it's not the how you would define a memoir in a sense where it really feels like it's this one contiguous story, if you will. But
Hmm.
so so what when you were sitting down to compose these pieces, what was the motivation behind how to structure this and use it more as a sort of a fragmented memoir instead of one that feels beginning to end like it's this one sort of continuous thing, if that makes any sense.
Totally makes sense. And I thought about that a lot, and it just, how can what I'm doing be become, a memoir that you pick up and read from beginning to end? And it just wasn't working that way. And I couldn't figure out how to make it fit, because I had been working on these essays for a long time, um, way before I met my publisher. I started working on them when my kids were teenagers because I needed to stay sane. Another wonderful tribute to writing itself, because it can keep you sane. And yeah, and I just kept writing them over, a good number of years, and I couldn't figure out, I thought that it was going to be a memoir, and it just wasn't working that way. So I talked with my editor, and I asked him, what the heck is this thing? And he says, I think it is a memoir in connected essays. And that just struck the right chord. That's exactly what it is. And, the way that it's structured does allow the reader to pick up my book at any point and read any of the essays and not lose the thread that, would happen if it was, a beginning to end type of contiguous memoir.
That must have been a very sort of liberating moment if you were like,
Oh,
"Oh, wow, this is like, oh, I'm sort of freed from the pressure of having
mhm,
to like have this like page 1 to 250 be this kind of continuous thing. I can
mhm,
actually make it, I can chop it up into digestible pieces and
yep,
then worry about stitching them together later."
mhm.
So, yeah, what was that moment like?
It was very liberating. And then, you know, having him, I have a wonderful editor. Eric Anderson is his name. To have him help me shape the damn thing and try to figure out, what order makes sense, with all these essays, and how, some of the ones that I wrote a long time ago were still important to me, but I had to take another look at them for how do I see this situation today, which is different than I saw it while it was happening 20, 30 years ago, Um, and so there was also that process of taking a second look, or a third or fourth or fifth look, um, at some of the older ones and trying to make sense out of how I see it now. And we were able to work together to make them, to make those essays work.
And so, early on in the book, you're right. You were a small child when your parents divorced, and so you moved from Michigan to Minneapolis, and your father moved to Springfield, Massachusetts, and 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 over the course of your certainly your young life and young adult life, I think you even went from South Carolina and to Massachusetts, and back to Minneapolis. So it was very nomadic in a lot of ways. And so in what ways was that difficult for you to wrestle with as you were looking to sort of find your roots and kind of find your voice as a an artist, but also as a young woman raising children?
Yeah, it was very difficult. When I left Minneapolis with my little boy, my intention was to, as so many young people, to go to New York and become a famous actor. I
Hmm.
didn't realize that I was too shy to be a good actress, although a lot of them are shy people. So there was that, and then meeting the guy that I married in Boston, um, and he was a musician. We were involved in a group together of artists from you know lots of different disciplines. And then he was from North Carolina, so we moved down there. Um, and then coming back home by then, I had all the kids, and, trying to figure out, okay, now what? How am I going to manage this? Whew.
Right. Yeah. And you have this a very entrepreneurial nature about
Mhm,
yourself that I think you took from your father and in the people that were close to you, because
mhm.
you started your own like secretarial business and recruited your kids to kind of help you too
Yep.
with that. So, it probably stems from needing to find ways to survive and thrive. But where does that come from for you?
Well, yeah, there was the need to survive and thrive, but there, as you pointed out, were also the influences of my parents. My mom and my stepfather, my mother and my grandmother. I never met either of my grandparents. They all died before I was born, but I knew who they were and what they did. And it seems like the women in my ancestry, a lot of them were entrepreneurial type of women. So I think it's in my blood somewhere. And it was just important to me to show my kids that even though we were poor, and we were poor, that's not all life was about, that they could become much more than, the life that we were living when they were growing up. So, you know, I think having the entrepreneurial spirit in me, which allowed me to start this little secretarial service that I had at home, um, was really useful for me and for my kids, because I think it did show them that, you know, this isn't the only way to live. That, being poor and living in the type of place we were living in and all that is not the only way to live. Yeah, I would say it was the influence that I observed from my mom especially, and my grandmother, that I knew about. I knew what they had done, and then my aunt Dorothy as well, who I mentioned earlier. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think it's I'm blanking on which one of your daughters, but she yeah, I suspect that the influence that you had, on your daughters, and specifically the one whose name I'm blanking on, but like, yeah, I think someone at school saying, "Oh, you should apply to, University of Minnesota and go there,"
Yep,
but
Tanya.
she had the wherewithal time, yeah, and it was it wa- it at some point or another, it was like, no, you can dream bigger and go bigger, and
Hmm.
she applies to Vassar and gets in, which is this great women's college in upstate New
Yep.
York, I believe.
Hmm.
So it's I don't know, I imagine the example you set was something, made that kind of possible
Hmm.
for her and others.
Right. Yeah, and then with that, there was also a counselor at school who had her interest at heart. He wasn't her counselor, but he was aware of her, because my daughter carries this. I don't know, how can you say it? She You notice her, and he was always there to encourage. And when we were there one night for student teacher conferences, I always took my kids to student teacher conferences with me, because sometimes if when I went alone, the teachers would tell me one thing and the kid would tell me something else. I said, nope, that ain't gonna happen again. We're going together just to stop this shit right now. And so Tanya and I were at school for a conference, and Mr. Whatever his name is in the book, the counselor, he's the one who said, so where are you going to college? She said, well, I guess I'm probably going to go to the EU. And he says, well, why don't you try some other colleges? Why don't you try Wellesley or Vassar? And we looked at each other like, duh, of course. The worst that'll happen is that you won't get in, but if you don't try, for sure you won't get in. And it's interesting that she applied to all these Ivy League colleges, and she applied to a hot shot college here in Minnesota, and that's the one she did not get into. So we ended up choosing Vassar, and yeah, it was great.
I love too this passage about halfway through the book too, where you write that at the time of this writing, I've been teaching 2 to 3 courses per year at Hamline for nearly 25 years. I was the first adjunct professor to win the Exemplary Teacher Award, which I won in 2014. I've learned to use my non-traditional background both to my advantage and the advantage of others. And I kind of loved that this reference to your non-traditional background, the non-traditional education and upbringing, and so many people bring that to the table. They bring their own histories with them, and you
Hmm.
used it in a way that empowered you and empowered your students. So, in what ways, maybe you can speak to that you were able to use your non-traditional background as a way to reach the people you were trying to reach.
Well, I think for me, it's like, let me see, how can I say this? I think that having a non traditional background has worked to my advantage, because I am not stuck on, the traditional ways of teaching. I'm more interested in what can I say? Developing the student from wherever they are. That's really important to me then, rather than standing in front of the classroom and saying, I'm the one, you know? I had a man come and visit my class some years ago it's Hamlin, not Hamline, Hamlin. And
Oh,
he
okay.
was writing a book on teaching. Man, he said to me, you will never win a teaching award, but the students are getting so much from you that he said, I don't know why more people don't teach like this. And I started thinking, it's probably because they're after the awards. I don't give a rip about the awards. I just want to work with these kids. A couple of times a year, I'll get a love letter from a student that I might have had 10 or 15 years ago. This one, most recent one, was from a kid who said, I bet you thought I wasn't listening. That's what he said. I said, what? He said, but I heard every word you said. And, he was a little white kid from some rural town from somewhere. And, he was kind of fidgety. I think, I don't know if he had ADD or whatever, but he was just a fidgety kid. And, he probably heard a lot of teachers throughout his life tell him, settle down, listen. But I could tell just from the way first of all, he was always the first one to arrive in the classroom. And, his comments in the classroom and even in small groups, I could hear were very insightful. I knew he was listening, but he thought, probably because of what he's heard all his life, that I didn't think he was listening. So he just had to let me know. And I thought that was so amazing now. So he told me all about his new wife and family and stuff. And it was just, I just love when shit like that happens. Sorry, that's one of my favorite words, so I have to say it every now and then.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and I think that, if I had a more traditional background, then, my teaching would probably be more traditional too. And the students would come away with a great education, period. Am I making any sense? I think that,
Of-
yeah, because I have a different way of being, that they come away with an education plus, I don't know, maybe more confidence or more of a view of what you can do that's not necessarily in the textbook. This is really hard for me, Brendan, because I don't even know how to express this stuff. I just do it. And if someone were to ask me to write down what is my method of teaching, I don't know if I could.
Right. I was actually going to ask you, so what is that method that is, that is not, by the book and not what would quote unquote win awards, because that doesn't matter. All that matters is connecting.
Yeah, and interestingly, I did win an award, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And even as an adjunct professor, and man, that was really something. But I don't know. I've heard students tell me in these love letters, or if I run into them somewhere, he says they will say things like, "When I was in your class, I didn't really understand what was going on, but it wasn't until a year or two later that all of a sudden it hit me." And I don't know. I honestly do not know how to explain what I do. But I don't know. I guess it works, at least for some
Yeah.
students.
Well, for sure. I mean, sometimes what makes it special is it's something that it just emanates from who you are as a person in your life. And if you could probably easily define it, it would probably take away some of the magic
Mm,
of what you do
could be.
away.
Could be. Oh.
Well, there's one essay in the book too, which must have been, a challenging and maybe even, uh, not rewarding, but like a challenging in a good way experience of writing an essay with your son Stevie,
Hmm.
who and it's titled "The Bank Robbery." I was wondering maybe you can talk a little bit about that chapter and what it was like to collaborate with your son on this particular essay.
Wow, that was amazing. Um, when he decided to rob this bank, it was right after 9/11. no judge in the world was going to have any kind of sympathy for a kid that did something like that right after 9/11. No way. So the timing was really off, really bad. I mean, it wouldn't have been cool to rob a bank no matter what. But right then, like, come on, kid. And so soon as and in the federal system, I learned that they can send you anywhere in the country, anywhere. So he was not in Minnesota. They sent him first to, I want to say, Colorado. He wrote me a letter and it just said, Mom, why did my life turn out like this? And, my first thought was, well, I could just answer him and say, because you screwed up. But there's a lot more to that. There was a very searching question. He wanted to know. And so I suggested that we start writing letters back and forth that touched on all types of topics, and I knew that there would be some things I didn't want to hear about, some of the mistakes I made as a mom. But it was just really important, I felt, for him, for us, not just for him, but for us to be able to discuss these things in, very real terms. And so we started writing these letters back and forth. And it went on for like 3 or 4 years because he was in the joint for 10 years. They sent him to Colorado, then they sent him somewhere else. Then every few years it seemed like they send them somewhere else if you have a long federal sentence. And, in between these letters, he would call me because I couldn't call him. They have to call you and, you have a certain amount of time that you can talk and then it just hangs up. So we would, these letters would just spark amazing conversations as well. And, after a while, my son had been, he had been in and out of the juvenile system for so long as well. And I didn't really know my son. So through this, I got to know my kid. And one of the things I learned about him was that he was a good writer. Yeah. And so it just occurred to me after doing this for several years that, I think there's something here that's worth trying to publish, at least trying to publish. And so, I talked to a couple of people and they liked it. And so it was, first, it's been published several times now in several different places and ended up now finally in my book. But when Stevie was released from prison, he's been out now, I don't even know how long. He was able to vote for the first time in his life in 2016. No, he didn't vote for the thing that just left Washington. But yeah, I mean, it was just so, we were talking early on, Brendan, when we first started talking about the healing power of writing and journaling and just how healing it is, and to get this stuff out of your body, out of your mind, onto the paper. And he's a true testament to the healing power of writing, because that kid has not been in trouble since, period, at all.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and he'd spent, I mean, from the time he was 13 till he, did this bank robbery in 2011, he'd been in and out of the juvie system, and then as an adult as well. And now, he's just being able to take that deep look with me, and for me to be able to do it with him as well was healing for both of us.
Yeah, that's amazing that that you learn so much about your son through these letters, basically as pen pals from this just horrible situation that just had him locked away for so long. And this is what allowed you to kind of grow together. It's just kind of a really touching experience. It's sad that it had to play out that way, but it did. And you're still able to make something of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, in some ways I don't feel like it was sad, because I don't know if it could have happened any other way.
That's a great point.
Yeah. People, all across the country, it seems like they have prison writing workshops. We have some here in Minnesota as well. And it's just so amazing what can happen to the inmates, men, women, juvenile people, just being able to write this stuff down and have somebody who really genuinely hears you. Um, and then all the more when it's, you and your parent. When I visited some of the prison writing workshops, one in particular, there was this young man. He couldn't look at me. He just couldn't. Um, it was like, his whole being was just so full of shame. It just made me so sad to observe this kid when he couldn't look at me. He asked me something like, well, he didn't ask me. He told me. He said, I think my life would be different too if I could talk to my mom like your son talks to you you know, this piece that you're referring to. And his life was so unbelievably horrific. I couldn't believe it. And he just had this longing to be able to communicate with his mother like he saw me and Stevie communicate in this piece.
And the final essay of the book too was, particularly strong, and I love this passage towards the end where you write, for Black women, loving ourselves and passing that self-love down to our daughters and our granddaughters is a difficult task. Centuries of negation often make us feel like we need to adopt a hard protective shell, which is either praised as strength or dismissed as hostility.
Mm-hmm.
In short, we turn ourselves into stone. And I that was just such a strong, just evocative passage.
Mm.
I loved it, marked it up, and in what ways, what was the, how did you arrive at that, and in what ways have you, avoided turning into stone?
I don't know that I have avoided it. I think there have been times in my life and situations that I've faced where I probably, came off like that. I don't know. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I haven't turned myself into stone because if I did, I probably wouldn't be able to write this stuff. I'd probably just be living a very sad life. But it is really hard because we are so often misunderstood. Um, and, the whole trauma that we have gone through that has, many people just don't even think about what we've gone through to get where we are. you know, I don't know, how have I kept from turning myself into stone? I don't know, maybe it's that same thing that we were talking about that my eighth grade teacher saw in me and that my daughter's, high school counselor saw in her. It was just really important for me to to do all I could to make my daughters and my sons feel like, they were important people worthy of managing around this whatever types of racism that they had to face that we have to face nearly every day. Again, I'm having a real hard time trying to explain, um, you know, trying to give you a straight answer. Yeah, when I saw, when things like that one daughter, Tanya, when she took her acceptance letter to school, and all the white women, especially counselors, just told her, well, I don't know who do you think you are, type of thing, and she came home just completely dejected. And my other two daughters have had situations that have been horrific as well, that you know people just completely negating them and making them feel like they're worthless little you know, pieces of crap. And, it's been really, really important for me to try to lift them back up and not let them turn themselves into bitter women, mad at the world, which can be really, really hard when you're facing stuff all the time, every day, you know?
Yeah, I can't imagine, because then what that does is it just further negatively reinforces that negative
Mm-hmm.
feedback loop where it's already a
Yep.
perception that they're dealing
Mm-hmm.
with, and then if they then start to harden because you're being treated like shit,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's just like, well, there you have it. How can I treat you otherwise when you're acting like
Right,
this? And
exactly.
it's just like, oh my God. It's like,
Yeah, it's like a
how do you
cycle.
function?
It never, yeah.
Who are some great writers, keep inspiring you and bringing you back to the ledger?
Well, Isabel Wilkerson for sure. Um, Tony Cade Bambara back in she was, in the 60s and 70s. I used to keep Isabel Allende's memoir, Paula, next to my computer because of something I heard her say on NPR. Somebody asked her how she manages to, write about her, the political stuff that went on in Chile while she was growing up, how she manages to do it so seamlessly when she's writing fiction or memoir or whatever. And she says, I don't think about it. I just tell my story. And for me, that's where it's at. I mean, instead of trying to, sort of force things in so that because you feel like you should. Like I'm getting a lot of essays now because I'm guest editor of an anthology that our college is putting out. And I'm getting all these beautiful nature essays and stuff, but they feel like they have to throw something in about George Floyd's murder. And it comes off just like that, oh yeah, I guess I better say something about George Floyd, even though I'm writing about sequoia trees in California. So it's like, oh, just don't do that shit. um,
Yeah. Well, that's just it. When you're writing from a point where it doesn't sound like you're being didactic or
mhm.
lecturing, when you just lay out the story, like that's the juice, that's the truth to actually inject the information you want to get across. It's like just tell the story, and
Just tell the
it will get
story.
in there.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, Octavia Butler, I really love her work. Um, Colson Whitehead, um, my writing buddy, who's a Dakota Indian person, native person, she just came out with a novel called The Seed Keeper. I love her work as well. And she wrote a memoir, historically researched memoir about her tribal people some time ago called Spirit Car, which is also inspiring to me because I was able to see again what Isabel Allende was talking about because she does it really seamlessly. James Baldwin, oh my God, yeah,
Mm.
those are some of my influences. Toni Morrison, the usuals, but then there's also people like Tommy Orange, Annika Fajardo, that
Mhm.
their voices and they just really turn me on. I just love, as you do, books, and I like the way sometimes that fiction can influence my way of writing nonfiction and vice versa. I'm working on a novel right now. Yeah, there's just so many books, so many wonderful books, and so many voices out there that are, that need to be heard.
So, at this point, I want to be mindful of your time,
Okay.
Carolyn. So, but thank you so much for jumping on the
Hmm.
show and talking about your book and your work. And so, where can people get more familiar with you and your work online?
My website is carolynleeholbrook.com. And then the website for my little organization that I'm running now, More Than a Single Story, is the same, morethanasinglestory.com.
Fantastic. Well, it was great talking to you, Carolyn. Thanks again for coming on the
You're welcome,
podcast.
and thanks for inviting me.
Man, I wish my name was Slam Granny. Thanks to Carolyn Holbrook for the time and the insights and the delightful conversation. And thanks to you, CNFers, for making it to this week's jam session. Always nice when we can spend this time together. Pro tip, make sure when you're doing the dishes that you get the outside of the bowl too. And it might seem obvious, but make sure your sponge is clean. Otherwise, you're just spreading muck around. Speaking from experience. You know the social channels at CNF Pod across the big three. Say hello. consider leaving a kind review on Apple Podcasts. I often take a screenshot and then share that across networks to let the world know how friggin' cool you are. We're at 101 ratings and reviews, and there's a lot of written reviews, given that most shows don't have as many written reviews per total ratings. So it's pretty great that most of the reviews, or a significant chunk, are written. So tell you what, I'm going to do this. The next 9 written reviewers will get a 30-minute coaching call with me. That's like a $50 value. Pretty much for you just taking a couple minutes to write a kind review on Apple Podcasts. I will stop this offer once you hit 110, but email me a screenshot of your review, creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com. And once it officially posts, then we'll proceed from there. Sound good? I think that's fair. Give it a shot. Why not? What's to lose? Couple things. Not to lose, but just a couple more things. I need to beat a few things to death here. One, deadline for the summer-themed issue of the CNF Pod audio magazine is fast approaching, March 21st. I hope you're hard at work on your essays, because deadlines are real, man. They are real. Submission guidelines are at the top of the homepage of brendanmeyer.com. Hey. 2, the audio magazine will be exclusive to Patreon members at that community. Issue 1 in isolation is free. It's in the normal podcast feed, but issue 2 and more and beyond are for the paid Patreon community. Your contribution will make it possible for me to afford you all sorts of cool goodies, to pay writers for their work as well. For what amounts to $48 a year, you help the production of 64 interviews and 2 blockbuster audio magazines a year. That will hopefully be 3, then 4. And you get transcripts too, just at that tier 1. And then there's other sort of exclusive things that I just post randomly on the Patreon community page that is only available to the Patreon community. I don't put it on my website. I just put it right there. So you get some extra goodies, a little extra seasoning here and there. So I hope you consider joining the growing community. It is growing slowly, but it is. And I just want to keep the lights on here at CNF Pod HQ. Oh, excuse me. Got a big yawn. Oh, man. Well, not much to say this week. I've been in one of those modes where I'm just eating everything in sight. I'm eating peanut butter like it's yogurt. I can't seem to stop eating, and that's bad because I'm an endomorph, which basically means every single fucking calorie I eat gets stored in my body in very unflattering ways. Take this 19.2 ounce Tallboy IPA I'm drinking right now. Straight to the love handles, man. And it's like I'm powerless to stop. I had some good habits working lately, and I've been falling off the rails. I'm trying to bring some order to this life. I wear sweatpants so often that when I put jeans on, I 100% forget to zip my fly up 100% of the time. Because sweatpants don't have flies, baby. Just a forgivable waistband that practically invites me to eat more pasta. This is madness. It's gotta stop, man. I'm the type of eater that if I see a sleeve of Oreos sitting around, instead of having 2 or 3 a day over the course of several days like a normal person, I'll see oh, there's 12 left. Better eat them now and get them out of here. Then the bloat kicks in and the shame cycle starts. Then I record a podcast about telling true stories and tell you poor suckers about my unhealthy relationship to food and drink. And you're like, oh boy, here we go again. And I'm like, well, at least I put this at the end of the show where the stragglers hang out. And this is the after party, right? Everybody's all been drunk on the conversation, and most of the party left at a reasonable hour. But you're still here with me, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to order up some calzones. Who's with me? Stay cool, CNFers. Get home safe, all right? Stay cool forever. See ya.